Foreign and Defense Ministers, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. This is the third UN Defense Peacekeeping Ministerial I have attended.
Man, my mother has told me so much about you. That was the beginning of a dream. This line, simple and direct, completed the psychological circle. It provided the proof of authenticity, linking the star directly to the initial, authoritative message. It suggested a private conversation had taken place in the mythical domestic sphere of the Pitt family, and that Anne had been the subject. By acknowledging the supposed mother's intervention, the scammer validated the entire premise. The dream that was beginning to unfold was woven from illusion, a delicate yet pervasive tapestry, where a woman believed she had somehow touched the heart of one of the biggest stars on the planet. This stage of the deception relied entirely on the emotional hunger inherent in the human condition, amplified by the isolation of the digital age. Anne fell in love, not just with the man behind the screen, but with the feeling, the illusion of being seen, cherished, and written to by a real Brad Pitt. It is vital to understand this distinction. Her affection was not merely for a handsome face or a talented actor. It was an affair with the idea of Brad Pitt. This idea encompassed global fame, artistic depth, and a wounded yet ultimately romantic soul. The love she felt was a profound validation of her own worth, a fantasy that redeemed the perceived failures and mundanity of her real-world life. When a global icon singles you out, it suggests you are, by extension, globally significant. This emotional elevation is often the most powerful and addictive element of the scam, far more potent than any financial promise. The illusion of being seen by a figure of such magnitude provided a psychological balm for the deep-seated loneliness that characterizes many lives in their later years, particularly when the familiar rhythms of marriage have deteriorated into silent rooms and mutual indifference. The machinery of the deception then escalated, transitioning from simple text to a multi-sensory emotional assault. She received poetic messages, tender words, and AI-generated photos that mirrored intimacy. Those behind the account knew exactly how to disarm the human heart. They were not merely criminals. They were called clinical students of human vulnerability. Their craft lay in recognizing the emotional blueprints of a middle-aged, lonely woman who grew up watching cinematic heroes. They knew the kind of language that works, not the crude requests of a conventional scam, but the evocative, high-flown poetics that recall the romance of classic Hollywood films, the very films that had cemented Pitt's image as a romantic hero. The messages were carefully constructed to be non-specific enough to be easily replicated across multiple victims, yet emotionally resonant enough to feel uniquely tailored to Anne. The use of AI-created images was the hammer blow that shattered the remaining walls of Anne's skepticism. These weren't grainy paparazzi shots or clumsy Photoshop efforts. They sent AI-created images of Brad Pitt, soft-eyed, half-smiling, paired with verses that felt sincere. The deepfake technology employed here was likely focused on face swapping or synthetic image generation, often leveraging generative adversarial networks, or GANs, to create intimate, unposed portraits that the public would never see. The soft-eyed gaze provided intimacy, replacing the actor's usual on-screen intensity with a gaze of personal devotion. The half-smiling expression was a calculated nod to his famous, charming reserve, the very look that had defined his effortless cool in films like Ocean's 11 and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Crucially, the images mirrored intimacy by depicting him in seemingly private settings, perhaps in a casual t-shirt or with a tousled, just-woken look. These images, combined with the poetic sincerity of the verses, created a compelling, overwhelming sense of privileged access. Anne was seeing the private Brad, the real Brad, the Brad only his most intimate partner would know. This was the irrefutable evidence that her fantasy was, in fact, reality. Day after day, Anne sank deeper into the dialogue she thought was love. This was the long, slow, and devastating process of emotional rewiring. The constant stream of communication established a Pavlovian dependency. Each message delivered a rush of dopamine, a confirmation that her extraordinary life was indeed taking place. The digital relationship became a parallel existence, one far more vibrant, meaningful, and emotionally fulfilling than the life she inhabited in her physical reality in France. She invested time, emotion, and hope, assets far more precious than any money, into the fantasy. The sheer consistency and intensity of the digital attention acted as an emotional anesthetic, dulling the pain of her existing, dissatisfying marriage. Her inner world was now entirely defined by the ping of her phone, the latest picture, the newest poetic stanza, and how strange it is when one longs to be loved. The line between truth and fiction becomes terrifyingly thin. This philosophical observation lies at the heart of all romance scams. Loneliness is a powerful psychological accelerant, capable of blurring the cognitive ability to distinguish between a desired outcome and a likely reality. For Anne, the desire to be loved by a man who represented the epitome of romantic success was so strong that it superseded all rational counterarguments. The improbability of a global superstar seeking out a middle-aged French woman on Instagram was dismissed by the overwhelming emotional proof provided by the daily dialogue and the believable AI images. The thin line between truth and fiction became terrifyingly thin because, for Anne, the fictional reality had become emotionally truer than the physical world around her. The fantasy provided hope, excitement, and validation. Her marriage offered only quiet disappointment. In that agonizing, asymmetrical contest, fantasy always wins, especially when armed with state-of-the-art AI. Anne began to believe that Brad Pitt, the man who once stood on the Oscar stage, who once held Angelina Jolie's hand on the red carpet, was now sending words of love to an ordinary woman in France. This belief was not merely a passive acceptance. It became an active, organizing principle of her life. It required her to rewrite her personal history and to justify the immense contradiction of the scenario. The more extraordinary the claim, the more she had to protect the belief, seeing any skepticism as an attack on her newfound reality. The narrative the scammer provided, a famous man seeking solace and real connection outside the superficial world of Hollywood, was perfectly pitched to the myth of the wounded, introspective Brad Pitt, the one who had experienced public loss and was now looking for something real, and became the chosen vessel for this redemption. The contrast was the engine of the belief. The man who had been with Angelina Jolie, the geopolitical icon, was now choosing Anne, the ordinary woman. This felt like the ultimate compliment, the ultimate Hollywood ending. That belief made her brave. In reality, it made her reckless. But in the context of her internal narrative, her actions were imbued with the righteous conviction of a woman finally taking control of her destiny. She divorced her husband, with whom the affection had long faded. This was the moment the digital fantasy exerted its most brutal and tangible effect on the physical world. Her decision was a stunning act of faith, a leap into the void based entirely on the promise of pixels and prose. The divorce was not just a legal severing, it was a cleansing ritual, an attempt to make her real life worthy of the extraordinary man who was waiting for her. Her husband, whose affection had long faded, represented the quiet, crushing failure of her past life. The phantom Brad Pitt represented a dazzling, passionate future. She dismantled her reality to make space for the man she believed was her destiny. The pain and logistics of the divorce were minor costs compared to the agony of continuing to live a lie while true love, her preordained love, was waiting for her. She began to live for the man on the screen, the man she believed was her destiny. Her life became a state of perpetual anticipation. She likely reorganized her schedule around the star's supposed time zones, checking her phone obsessively, responding with the care and devotion of a newly smitten lover. Every mundane detail of her French life, her bakery, her friends, her daily routines, was now merely a holding pattern, a waiting room for the day her destiny would arrive. The man on the screen was now the primary focus of her identity, her future, and her emotional capital. This complete subsuming of her identity into the fantasy set the stage for the inevitable financial exploitation. But the scammers didn't stop there. Having secured her emotional commitment and proven her willingness to upend her life, the con artists were ready to pivot to the financial phase, the ultimate and intended goal of their elaborate psychological campaign. The immense emotional investment, the divorce, the hope, the daily devotion, was merely the cost of entry, the payment required to earn the right to ask for the actual money. The shift from romance to finance had to be as seamlessly believable as the initial approach, and it had to leverage the very persona they had created. The request was introduced not as a demand, but as a secret emergency that only Anne could solve. The narrative typically employed in these high-stakes celebrity romance scams is highly effective because it plays on the public knowledge of the star's complex life. The scammers may have fabricated a story about a secret legal crisis, perhaps a critical legal fee needed to finalize his divorce from Angelina Jolie, which, if not paid immediately, would cost him custody of his children or damage his career arm.
For 3 decades, the world has witnessed hundreds of faces come and go across the silver screens of Hollywood. This continuous, relentless cycle is the very engine of the celebrity industrial complex, a machine that thrives on the new, the novel, and the next big thing. It is a world of meteoric rises and equally precipitous falls, where the incandescent glow of a box office smash can fade into the quiet obscurity of a direct-to-streaming release in the span of a few years. Stardom, in this context, is often a fleeting currency, spent quickly in a flurry of magazine covers, talk show appearances, and franchise opportunities before its value inevitably depreciates. We have seen the wunderkinds, the overnight sensations, the character actors who finally got their due, and the matinee idols whose chiseled features promised a new era. They arrive on a wave of hype, their names whispered in casting rooms and emblazoned on posters, becoming, for a brief, shining moment, the center of the cultural universe. Yet, the memory of the audience is notoriously fickle, and the landscape of fame is littered with the ghosts of yesterday's heroes. The industry demands constant reinvention, a perpetual motion that few can sustain. Trends shift, audience tastes evolve, and the very definition of what constitutes a movie star is in a state of constant flux. The faces that once launched 1,000 ships, or at least sold 1 million tickets, can become mere answers in a trivia game, their iconic roles relegated to nostalgic, "where are they now?" segments. Yet, only a few names have managed to linger in memory, to transcend the brutal ephemerality of their profession and embed themselves into the very fabric of cinematic history. These are the figures who defy the cycle, whose presence on screen feels less like a performance and more like an event. They possess a gravitational pull that holds the audience captive, not just for the duration of a film, but for the duration of a career. They become landmarks in our own lives. We remember who we were when we first saw them, the stages of our own personal histories marked by their filmographies. Names like Tom Cruise, Leonardo DiCaprio, Meryl Streep, and Denzel Washington belong to this pantheon. They are not just actors. They are institutions. Their careers built on a foundation of shrewd choices, undeniable talent, and an almost preternatural understanding of their own mythos. And Brad Pitt is one of them. His name, spoken aloud, carries a weight, a resonance that extends far beyond the confines of a movie set. It evokes a specific kind of modern American masculinity, a particular brand of cool, and a narrative of artistic evolution that has unfolded in the public eye for more than 30 years. To say he has lingered in memory is an understatement. He has, in fact, helped to shape it, his face a constant reference point in the collective consciousness of a generation. He is not merely an actor. This distinction is crucial to understanding his longevity and his impact. While his craft is undeniable, honed over decades and recognized with the industry's highest honors, his identity transcends the list of characters on his resume. To be merely an actor is to be a vessel for other people's words, a chameleon who disappears into a role. Pitt, while capable of transformation, never truly disappears. Instead, he brings the weight of his own persona, his own accumulated history, to every part he plays. He is an icon, a breeze, a concept, a dream that cannot be grasped, yet can never be forgotten. This is not hyperbole. It is an attempt to articulate the intangible quality that separates a star from a superstar. To call him an icon is to place him in a lineage that includes James Dean, Paul Newman,